Welcome, night wanderers, to Bedtime's sleepy historian, the quiet corner of YouTube where history is told slowly, softly, and with just enough wonder to carry you towards sleep. Tonight, we step into the golden sands of ancient Egypt, where women faced one of life's most dangerous trials, surviving childbirth without modern medicine. In a world without sterile tools, pain relief, or doctors as we know them, Egyptian women relied on midwives, protective amulets, whispered prayers to the goddess Tauret, and herbal remedies gathered from the Nile's banks. Their struggle was both perilous and profound, yet it was also filled with resilience, faith, and the timeless bond between mothers and daughters. So lie back, let the ancient Nile flow through your imagination, and listen as we uncover how these women brought forth life under the shadow of death. And if you find comfort in these journeys through history, remember to subscribe, so you'll always have a quiet story waiting when the world feels too loud. Tell me, friend, where are you listening from tonight? The Nile's whisper. The sun dipped low over the Nile, staining the river with the color of molten copper. Palm trees swayed, and reeds rustled, carrying the scents of mud, fish, and lotus flowers. In a mud brick home near the riverbank, a young woman named Neferet clutched her belly as another wave of pain rippled through her. She was no stranger to childbirth. This was her third, but each time felt as if she stood on a narrow bridge between life and death, uncertain which side she would fall upon. Her mother, an older woman with hands weathered by years of grinding grain and weaving linen, placed a damp cloth on Neferet's forehead. "Breathe, daughter. Tauret watches over you," she murmured, glancing toward a clay figurine of the hippo-headed goddess that stood near the doorway. Its wide, comical face was meant to scare away evil spirits, to frighten them into leaving mother and child in peace. Outside, a midwife prepared bundles of herbs, myrrh for cleansing, honey for healing, and garlic, pungent and sharp, believed to ward off unseen sickness. A low chant began, the women of the household humming a rhythm older than pyramids, a steady lull meant to soothe both the mother and the unborn child. Neferet gritted her teeth. She knew the dangers. She had seen other women bleed too much, or lose breath after a long struggle. Yet she also knew that life had to press forward, just as the Nile rose and fell with the seasons. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the waves of fear, was a quiet, stubborn strength. The midwife entered, her hands firm, her voice calm. "Tonight you will bring life into this world," she said, kneeling beside Neferet. "And all of Egypt's gods will witness it." The room smelled of smoke, herbs, and sweat. The night stretched long. The river whispered outside, patient and eternal, as another cry tore from Neferet's lips. The midwife's hands. The room glowed faintly with the light of oil lamps, their flames trembling with every movement inside. Neferet leaned against a low stool carved from sycamore, her arms wrapped tightly around its sides as another contraction bent her body forward. The stool was no ordinary seat, it was the birthing stool, an heirloom passed through her family for generations, smoothed by the hands and bodies of women who had come before her. Its legs were sturdy, its surface worn by time, and in that simple object was the weight of countless births, both triumphant and tragic. Beside her, the midwife, Hennet, hummed low and steady. She was a woman of 50, her hair streaked with silver, her presence commanding without force. Hennet had guided dozens, perhaps hundreds, of births, and though she knew not all ended in joy, she carried herself as though she could bargain with the gods themselves. Her fingers, stained faintly from herbs, traced circles along Neferet's back. "Hold to the earth," Hennet whispered, pressing Neferet's feet firmly against the packed clay floor. "The ground will give you strength. You are not alone." A bowl of natron water sat nearby, its sharp, salty tang cutting through the air. It would be used to cleanse hands, tools, and perhaps the child's skin once the ordeal was done. Next to it lay strips of linen, woven finely by Neferet's own hands in quieter days, destined to swaddle the life she now fought to bring forth. The goddess Tauret's figurine caught the lamplight, its round belly and clawed feet casting long shadows against the wall. Hennet glanced at it briefly, then muttered a prayer under her breath. "Keep the demons away! Keep her safe!" Neferet groaned, sweat dripping into her eyes. She wanted to collapse, to surrender, yet something deeper urged her on. The memory of her 2 children sleeping in the next room, their small breaths a reminder of what this night could bring. Hennet's hands guided her, steady as the Nile's current. "Soon," she said. "Soon, child. The dawn will hear your baby's cry." Outside, the stars glimmered, ancient witnesses to countless nights like this, while inside the mud-brick walls, one woman's struggle became the fragile center of the universe. The gods at the threshold. The hours passed as slowly as the turning of the stars. The air inside the home grew thick, filled with the mingled scents of sweat, burning resin, and crushed herbs. Neferet's cries rose and fell like waves, sometimes fierce, sometimes fading to faint whimpers. Between them, she listened to the sound of women's voices around her, her mother murmuring encouragement, her sister sprinkling incense upon the coals, Hennet chanting words older than memory. Every gesture carried meaning. A smear of honey along the doorway, to sweeten the path for the newborn soul. A strip of linen tied at the wrist, knotted 3 times to confuse evil spirits, and keep them from meddling. Even the placement of the birthing stool mattered, set facing east, toward the rising sun, so the child would be welcomed with light. Hennet paused and lifted her hands, palms outward, as though addressing an unseen presence. "Bess, protector of women," she intoned, naming the squat, lion-faced god known for guarding births. "Stand at the threshold. Scare away all that would harm her. May your grimace frighten demons more than her cries attract them." Neferet clung to the stool as another pain surged. She felt her strength draining, her mind flickering between the present and memories of her own birth stories told by her mother, how she, too, had arrived with difficulty, and how prayers had carried her through. Perhaps the gods weighed each birth like grain on a scale, balancing life and death with cruel precision. At the height of the contraction, Hennet pressed firmly against her belly, steadying the child's descent. Her voice dropped low, commanding and calm. "He comes. The gods are at the threshold, Neferet. Do not falter now." The room seemed to tilt, the shadows deepening, as if unseen eyes truly gathered around them. Outside, a dog barked at nothing, then fell silent, its voice cut off as though in reverence. Neferet gasped for breath, her chest heaving, her strength nearly gone. Yet within that moment of weakness, something shifted, the feeling of movement inside her, the nearness of life pressing forward. And as the pain peaked, Hennet leaned close, whispering, "Push, daughter. Push as though the Nile itself flows through you." Between breath and silence. The night had grown cold, the stars sharp against the black sky, but inside the room, heat radiated from the bodies of the women and the burning brazier. Neferet's skin glistened with sweat, her hair sticking in damp strands across her face. She could barely distinguish one contraction from the next. They came like storms with no warning, crashing, subsiding, then gathering again. Hennet crouched low, her hands ready. The other women leaned close, their eyes wide, breaths held. Every sound seemed amplified, the hiss of resin on coals, the creak of the stool, the ragged cries that tore from Neferet's throat. Then came a moment unlike the others. The silence that followed her last push felt unbearable, as though the entire world had paused. For the span of a heartbeat, there was nothing, no cry, no movement, only the heavy stillness of bodies waiting. Neferet's chest heaved. Her eyes searched wildly for answers, but no one spoke. Hennet bent closer, her hands moving swiftly, firmly, urging, coaxing. The seconds stretched like years. And then it came, the thin, high-pitched wail of a newborn. Weak at first, then louder, stronger, cutting through the air like a blade through cloth. Relief swept through the room in a rush of tears and laughter. Neferet sagged against the stool, her body trembling with exhaustion. Hennet held up the small, wet body, the child's limbs kicking feebly against her palms. She did not cut any cord yet. Instead, she raised the infant briefly toward the east-facing doorway, as if presenting the child to Ari himself, the god who brought the sun. "A child of Egypt," she murmured. "Born beneath the gaze of the gods." The women broke into quiet sobs and laughter, their hands reaching to touch, to bless, to feel the tiny warmth of new life. Neferet closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her body ached, but in that ache lived triumph. She had crossed the threshold again, this time carrying both herself and her child back into the world of the living. The wail quieted as the baby was swaddled in soft linen, the very cloth Neferet had woven months ago, each thread now a testament to her foresight. The newborn was placed against her chest, and in that instant, the room seemed to breathe again, walls, lamps, and shadows softening, as if the gods themselves exhaled in relief. But Hennet's eyes lingered on Neferet's face, sharp and searching, for she knew the struggle was not yet fully over. The shadow that lingers. The baby's cries faded into small, hiccuping whimpers as he nestled against Neferet's chest. His warmth seeped into her skin, his heartbeat fluttering like a sparrow's wing. She inhaled deeply, drinking in the scent of new life, a mixture of milk, blood, and something faintly sweet, like crushed lotus. Yet Hennet did not relax. She watched closely, her hands steady but her brow furrowed. The child had come safely, but the danger for Neferet was not gone. Many women bled after birth, slipping away quietly, leaving behind their infants as the living mourned. Hennet had seen it too often, the joy of a cry followed by the silence of a mother's last breath. Neferet winced. A deep ache twisted low within her, sharper than she expected. She shifted, grimacing, clutching the edge of the stool. Her mother rushed forward, murmuring prayers, wiping her face with the damp cloth. Hennet gave swift orders. "Bring more linens! And the garlic water, now!" Her sister darted to obey, fumbling with the bowl of natron water and the bundles of herbs. The room, once filled with relief, now tensed again. The women's voices softened to whispers, their eyes darting between Neferet's pale face and Hennet's calm but urgent movements. Hennet pressed a bundle of soaked linen against Neferet, her voice soothing but firm. "Stay awake, child. Stay with us. Look at him, your son. He needs your breath, your strength." Neferet blinked, her vision blurring at the edges. She forced herself to look down at the small bundle against her chest. The baby's tiny fingers curled, grasping at nothing. His presence anchored her, tethering her spirit to the world when her body begged for release. "Do not drift," Hennet whispered, her words sharp as a command and soft as a lullaby. She began to chant under her breath, calling once more to Tauret, to Bes, to Isis the Great Mother, layering prayer upon prayer like bricks upon a wall. Outside, the Nile flowed steady and eternal, but inside the mud-brick walls, time wavered, stretched thin between two worlds. Neferet's breath came shallow, uneven. The shadow of death lingered close, patient, watching. And still, Hennet worked, her hands and her faith refusing to yield. Blood and prayers. The lamplight flickered wildly as if stirred by unseen wings. Neferet's face had gone pale, the sheen of sweat on her brow replaced by a ghostly stillness that terrified the women around her. Her breathing rattled, thin and irregular, while her baby whimpered softly against her chest. Hennet worked quickly, her fingers sure despite the weight of fear pressing down on the room. She took a strip of linen, soaked it in a mixture of honey and resin, and pressed it firmly where the bleeding would not stop. The air thickened with the sharp, almost medicinal scent. "Keep her awake!" Hennet barked, her voice breaking through the growing panic. Her mother knelt beside her, stroking Neferet's cheek, murmuring her childhood name. "Little Lotus, stay. Stay here with us. Look at me. Do not let go." Neferet's eyelids fluttered, heavy as stone. She felt herself sliding into a strange darkness, not frightening, but inviting, like sinking into the cool waters of the Nile after a long day in the fields. For a heartbeat, she wanted to surrender. But then came a cry, thin, insistent, the baby's cry. It pierced the haze, dragged her back. Her body was weak, but her heart clawed toward that sound. Hennet reached for another bundle of herbs, ground frankincense mixed with pomegranate rind. She burned some on the brazier, letting the acrid smoke curl upward, a signal to the gods and a ward against the lurking spirit of death. The women joined her, their voices weaving into a chant. "Life for the mother! Life for the child! Turn back, O shadow! Turn back!" The rhythm filled the room, soft yet relentless, like the pounding of oars on water. Neferet stirred, her lips parting. "Do not let him!" Her words broke, barely audible, but Hennet leaned close and understood. "No harm will touch him," Hennet vowed, pressing harder, willing the blood to cease. "Nor you, if the gods still hear me." The baby wailed louder, as though demanding his mother remain. And with each cry, Neferet's chest rose again, shallow but steady, refusing to yield. Hennet closed her eyes, whispering one last prayer to Isis, the Great Mother. "Bind her womb, O Lady of Magic! Knot it shut with your power! Let this woman live!" The flames snapped, the herbs hissed, and slowly, like the Nile retreating after a flood, the bleeding began to lessen. "You said?" The knot of life. The tension in the room shifted. Where moments before despair had thickened the air, now a fragile thread of hope wound its way through. Hennet lifted her hands from Neferet's body, her palms glistening with blood, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She whispered a final invocation, tracing the sign of the Ankh, the looped cross of life, across Neferet's skin with the tip of her finger. "Isis has heard us," she said quietly, though she did not yet allow herself to rest. Neferet stirred faintly. Her lips parted, and a shuddering breath escaped. Her chest rose again, shallow but no longer faltering. A tremor of relief passed through the gathered women. Her mother sobbed openly, kissing her daughter's damp forehead, while her sister pressed cool cloths to her temples. Hennet moved with practiced care, binding Neferet with fresh strips of linen, pulling them snugly, murmuring as she worked. "Tight as the knot of life, firm as the bonds of Isis, close to the shadow." Each strip was tied not just with hands, but with faith, the faith that words could stitch wounds invisible to the eye. The baby, nestled in Neferet's arms, whimpered once more before slipping into quiet, his tiny chest rising and falling with the calm rhythm of sleep. His presence anchored the moment, a reminder of why the struggle had been endured. Outside, the first hint of dawn painted the horizon pale gold. The Nile reflected it faintly, its waters calm after the long night. The cry of an ibis echoed, strange and solemn, as though even the birds bore witness to this survival. Hennet finally leaned back, exhaustion etching lines into her face. She met Neferet's gaze, weak but aware, and gave a firm nod. "You have walked through death's door and returned. Few are given that gift twice. Guard it well." Neferet blinked slowly, her lips curling into the faintest smile. She turned her head just enough to look at her son, swaddled in linen she herself had woven. "Then his name shall be Ankhu," she whispered, her voice rough but steady. For he is life, and life is what we have won. The women murmured approval, touching the child gently, as though his small body carried the blessing of the gods themselves. But even as joy seeped into the home, Hennet's eyes lingered on the fading shadows in the corners, wary, knowing too well that survival was never guaranteed, even after dawn had broken. The dawn vigil. The sun crept slowly above the horizon, spilling light across the mud-brick walls. Its warmth seeped into the chamber, driving away the chill of night and softening the sharp glow of the lamps. Yet though morning had arrived, the women did not relax. They kept a silent vigil, their eyes shifting often to Neferet, as if afraid that death might slip back through the cracks if they let their guard down. Neferet lay reclined on a pile of woven mats, her son nestled against her breast. Her skin was pale, her breast shallow, but color had begun to creep back into her lips. Each rise and fall of her chest brought a wave of relief, like the slow rhythm of the river outside. Hennet remained seated beside her, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. She had not yet closed her eyes, though the night's labor weighed heavy on her. A midwife could not indulge in sleep until she was certain the mother was safe. She had seen too many women slip away at dawn, after all believed they had survived. On a low table, bowls of offerings had been set, dates, bread, and beer for the goddess Taret, a small smear of honey left near the threshold for Bes, the household protector. Smoke still drifted lazily from the brazier, carrying the last notes of frankincense toward the rafters. The scent was heavy, but comforting, as though it stitched the fragile boundary between the mortal and the divine. Neferet stirred, her voice faint. "Did I truly, almost leave?" Hennet looked at her, steady and unflinching. "Yes. You walked close to the gates. But you turned back." Neferet's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of gratitude. She pressed her lips to her son's downy head. "Then the gods heard me," she whispered. "I begged them not to let him be alone." Her mother clasped her hand, eyes glistening. "They listened, child. They listened." Outside, neighbors had begun to stir. The bleating of goats, the call of a boy driving ducks to the river, the faint thud of millstones grinding grain, all ordinary sounds of life returning to the village. Yet inside Neferet's home, the women still moved carefully, quietly, as though guarding a flame that could be snuffed out with the slightest breath. Hennet finally rose, stretching her stiff limbs. "She must not be left alone for 3 days," she instructed firmly. "The spirit of death lingers longest in that time. Watch her. Feed her. Keep the house bright with light and song." The women nodded, their faces solemn. For them, survival was not a single moment, but a vigil stretched across days, stitched together by prayers and the watchful eyes of family. Neferet closed her eyes, not in surrender this time, but in rest. For the first time since night had fallen, she allowed herself to drift, her son's warmth pressed firmly to her chest, her breath rising in fragile but steady rhythm. The House of Women. The following day, Neferet's home became a gathering place, as often happened after a birth. Women from nearby households arrived with gifts of bread, onions, and jars of beer brewed fresh that morning. Some carried sprigs of lotus and papyrus, their fragrance filling the small room, while others brought protective amulets carved hastily from faience, tiny blue figures of Taret, or scarabs meant to guard against evil. They came not only to celebrate but to watch, to tend, to ensure the mother did not falter. In Egypt, birth was never only the labor of one woman, it was the work of many, the weaving together of hands, voices, and prayers. Neferet lay on her mats, weak but smiling faintly at the sight of her sisters and neighbors. Her son Ankhu slept in a shallow reed basket beside her, swaddled snugly, his breath soft and even. Each visitor bent to touch his tiny cheek or murmur a blessing. "Strong legs, strong lungs," one woman whispered. May he live as long as the Nile flows, said another. Hennet oversaw the household like a general, though her commands were gentle. She ordered broth to be simmered with garlic and leeks, declaring it would give Neferet strength. She instructed the younger girls to grind barley for more beer, not just for celebration but because it was safer than river water. Every task became part of the ritual of survival. As the women worked, they filled the house with chatter. They told stories of their own births, both harrowing and humorous. They spoke of neighbors who had not survived, their names remembered with solemn nods. They laughed about men who, too frightened to hear the cries of childbirth, had fled their own homes until the ordeal was finished. The air hummed with the rhythm of female voices, rising, falling, overlapping, like a woven cloth of sound. It was not only talk, it was medicine. Their laughter, their remembrance, their shared burdens wrapped around Neferet like an invisible blanket, giving her strength no herb could provide. Her mother leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Do you see, little Lotus? You do not walk this road alone. Neferet smiled faintly, her eyes fluttering shut. She let the voices wash over her, carrying her into a half-sleep that was soft, warm, and guarded by love. And so the house, once filled with fear and blood, became the house of women, its walls echoing with songs, prayers, and laughter, as though life itself had taken root again within its clay bricks. The naming. On the third day, as dawn painted the Nile in streaks of rose and gold, the women gathered again for a ritual almost as important as the birth itself, the naming of the child. No Egyptian child was considered fully in the world until his name was spoken, offered, and accepted beneath the gaze of the gods. Neferet, still weak but steadier now, sat propped against cushions. Her son lay across her lap, wrapped in linen, his dark eyes blinking open for the first time with curious slowness. The room was hushed, the chatter of the previous day replaced with reverent silence. Even the children who had come to peer through the doorway were quiet, wide-eyed at the ceremony. Hennet held a small bowl of Nile water, shimmering faintly in the lamplight. She dipped her fingers into it and sprinkled drops across the baby's brow, murmuring words that blurred the line between blessing and spell. Waters of the great river, carry him forward. May he flow strong, may he never run dry. Neferet's mother placed a lotus petal beside him, pale and fragrant. May he open with the sun and rest with the night, as the lotus does. Finally, Neferet spoke, her voice fragile but unwavering. He shall be called Ankhu. Life. For he is the life I fought for, the life that tethered me here. The women murmured approval, repeating his name softly as though weaving it into the air itself. Ankhu. 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 With each repetition, the name grew heavier, more real, settling into the child as surely as flesh and bone. Hennet raised her hands. The name has been spoken. The gods have heard. He is known now, and the shadows cannot take him. The baby stirred, his small mouth opening in a cry that echoed like an answer to the ritual. The women laughed, relief loosening the solemnity of the moment. One of them clapped her hands and said, There! He accepts his name. Afterward, the household filled again with food, laughter, and songs, but something had changed. Neferet no longer seemed like a woman teetering between two worlds. Her cheeks glowed faintly, her eyes brighter than before. Holding Ankhu close, she whispered his name again and again, like a spell of her own making, binding him to her and herself to him. And for the first time since the night of his birth, the air in the house felt wholly free of shadows. Only sunlight poured through the doorway, falling across the mother and child as though blessing them both. The midwife's wisdom. When the naming was done and the day's celebration faded into quiet, Hennet lingered at Neferet's side. The other women had gone to tend their homes, leaving the small chamber scented with the remains of incense, and faint sweetness of lotus. Outside, the sound of ducks on the river drifted in, along with the rhythmic calls of men pulling their boats upstream. Hennet sat cross-legged on the floor, her back straight, her face solemn. She had seen too many mothers slip into weakness after the joy of a safe birth, lulled into thinking danger had passed. She would not allow it here. "You must rest," Hennet said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "No grinding grain. No carrying water. Your body is still mending. For 40 days you are between the worlds. Do you understand?" Neferet, cradling Ankhu against her breast, nodded faintly. "I understand." But Hennet leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do not only say it, believe it. I have buried too many who thought themselves strong too soon." Her voice softened. "The blood takes time to quiet. The wound takes time to close. Let others serve you, for the gods themselves demand you guard your strength." Neferet's mother, who had been kneading dough at the edge of the room, looked up and added, "I will not let her lift so much as a jar of water." Hennet gave a small nod of approval, then reached for her pouch. She drew out a tiny amulet, an ivory carving of Tauret, no larger than a thumb. Its wide, round eyes and snarling mouth gave it an almost comical appearance, but in it lay fierce protection. She pressed it into Neferet's hand. "Keep this near you at night," Hennet instructed. "Hang it above the child's bed when he sleeps apart from you. It will watch when you cannot." Neferet studied the little figure, her lips curving in a tired smile. "She is ugly." Hennet chuckled, her first laugh in days. "That is her power. She is so fearsome that even demons flee at the sight of her. Do not underestimate what ugliness can do." The moment stretched warm, gentle, like sunlight through reeds. Neferet tucked the amulet close, kissed Ankhu's forehead, and whispered his name once more. Hennet, watching them, finally allowed her shoulders to loosen. She had fought for 2 lives that night, and both had endured. Yet in her heart she knew, Egypt's mothers lived always on the edge of the knife. Survival was never guaranteed, only earned, and guarded fiercely with every breath. The Feast of Gratitude. A week after Ankhu's birth, when Neferet's strength had returned enough for her to sit upright without trembling, the household prepared a small feast. In Egypt, survival itself was worthy of celebration, and though food was modest in their village, the neighbors came together to give what they could. Clay jars of beer were lined along the wall, their frothy tops spilling slightly in the heat. Loaves of barley bread baked in dome-shaped ovens were carried in, still warm, their crusts darkened by smoke. There were onions and garlic, baskets of figs, and a dish of salted fish brought from the river. Even a small portion of honey had been gifted, carefully spooned into a clay bowl that gleamed gold in the sunlight. The women sang as they prepared the table, their voices rising in lilting tones, songs of protection, of thanksgiving, of laughter. Children darted between their legs, chasing one another, pausing only to peek at the swaddled baby with wide eyes. Neferet, seated on cushions near the wall, held Ankhu close. His eyes now opened more often, dark and alert, following the movement of light and shadow. Every time she whispered his name, his lips twitched as if in reply. The sight made her heart swell with a fierce, almost painful love. Hennet presided over the offerings, placing a portion of bread and fish near the household shrine where clay figures of Isis, Tauret, and Bes stood. She poured beer into a shallow bowl and lifted it high, her voice solemn. "For the gods who guarded us, who turned back the shadow, we give thanks. May their favor not depart from this house." The people echoed her words, bowing their heads. Then, with laughter, they broke bread, passing pieces around until every hand held food. Neferet tasted the bread, soft and smoky, and tears pricked her eyes. How ordinary it was, and yet how extraordinary to be here to taste it. Her mother noticed her silence and touched her shoulder gently. "You are alive," she said simply. "I am alive," Neferet whispered back, as though still convincing herself. She looked down at Ankhu, asleep in her arms. "And so is he." As the feast stretched into the evening, the house brimmed with noise and warmth, a tide of voices and laughter that pushed back all memory of blood and fear. It was a living wall, built not of bricks but of people, protecting mother and child with the simplest magic of all, community. And as the first stars appeared, Neferet leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and let herself believe that she and Ankhu had been woven firmly into the fabric of life once more. The quiet after. When the last of the guests departed and the lamps were dimmed, the house fell into a silence so complete that Neferet could hear the faint rustle of reeds outside and the occasional lap of water against the riverbank. After days of voices, laughter, and footsteps, the stillness felt strange, heavy, almost fragile, as if one loud sound could shatter it. Ankhu slept in his reed basket beside her, wrapped in linen, his mouth opening and closing as though still dreaming of milk. His breaths came in soft, steady sighs. Neferet lay on her mats, staring at the low ceiling beams darkened with smoke. For the first time since his birth, she let herself think of what might have been, the shadow that had nearly claimed her, the silence that might have filled the house instead of laughter. Her hand drifted to the amulet Hennet had given her, the little ivory turret hanging from a cord beside the basket. She touched it lightly, whispering a prayer of thanks. The figure's ugly, fierce face caught the faint glow of the dying coals, watching as if ready to snarl at any spirit daring to creep near. Neferet's mother slept in the corner, her snores soft and rhythmic, while her sister lay curled nearby. The women had insisted on staying close during these first nights, refusing to leave her unattended. Even in slumber, their presence felt like a shield, an unspoken vow that she would not be left vulnerable. Neferet shifted slightly, her body still sore but stronger than it had been. She looked at Ankhu's tiny fists, his fragile skin, and a wave of tenderness washed through her so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She had thought she might never see him breathe, never hold him. And yet here he was, alive, warm, utterly dependent on her. She leaned closer, pressing a kiss to his head, whispering, "You are the reason I stayed. You pulled me back." Outside, a breeze stirred the reeds, carrying the faint call of a night bird. The Nile shimmered under the moonlight, vast and eternal, its waters bearing countless secrets, countless lives. And in one small mud brick house by its banks, a mother and her son slept side by side, fragile, yet still here, still woven into the endless current of existence. The night deepened. The shadows lingered at the edges, as they always did, but Neferet no longer feared them. She had faced them, crossed their threshold, and returned with life in her arms. Lessons by the river. By morning, the silence of the house gave way to the familiar rhythms of village life. Roosters crowed, children's voices rang in the dusty lanes, and women carried jars to the river, their laughter carried on the breeze. Neferet, feeling stronger, asked her mother if she might walk with her to the Nile. At first, there was hesitation. Her body was still healing, her strength not yet full, but Neferet insisted. "I want to feel the river again," she said softly. "I want Ankhu to hear it." So they went slowly, her mother supporting her arm, while her sister carried the baby in his reed basket. The path was lined with rushes, their tips nodding in the warm wind. When they reached the banks, Neferet lowered herself onto a flat stone, the sun painting the water in molten gold. She breathed deeply. The Nile smelled of silt, of life itself. Boats drifted lazily, their sails taut against the morning wind. Women knelt at the edges, scrubbing clothes, their chatter rising and falling like birdsong. Her mother placed the basket at Neferet's side, and Ankhu stirred at the brightness of the day. His tiny hand escaped his wrappings, fingers curling as if reaching for the river's endless motion. Neferet traced the water with her eyes, then turned to her mother. "Tell me, how did you bear it? When you gave birth to me and my sisters? Did you fear the shadow as I did?" Her mother's gaze followed the river, long and steady. "Yes. Always. Each time, I feared I would not return. But fear is only part of the story. The other part is trust, in the gods, in the women around you, and in yourself. That trust becomes strength." Neferet nodded slowly, the words sinking into her like the river's water into thirsty soil. She looked at Ankhu and whispered, "Then I will teach him trust too. And strength." As they sat in silence, an older woman from the village passed by, balancing a jar on her head. She paused to admire the baby, blessing him with a gesture of her hand. "May he grow strong, like the river reeds," she said before walking on. The words lingered. Neferet imagined Ankhu growing, learning to walk along these same banks, to fish in these waters, to laugh with the other children. She imagined herself watching, guiding, teaching. The thought steadied her heart. And in that moment, she realized survival was not just about escaping death. It was about what one chose to do with the life that followed. The midwife's secret. Later that afternoon, Hennet visited once more. The midwife carried a bundle wrapped in linen, and her eyes twinkled as she set it down beside Neferet. "I've brought you something," she said. Neferet leaned forward curiously, her body still aching but her spirit eager. Hennet unwrapped the linen to reveal a small clay jar, sealed with wax and painted with simple symbols, spirals, reeds, and the outline of a hippo. "What is it?" Neferet asked, her voice hushed as though handling something sacred. Hennet smiled. "A mixture of herbs and resins, my own making. It helps the womb heal, the body regain its blood, and the spirit feel light again. Not all midwives give such things. Some keep them as secrets, guarded like treasures." She scooped a pinch of the powder into a cup of warm water and handed it to Neferet. "Drink, and you will feel your strength return more swiftly." The taste was bitter, sharp on her tongue, but warmth spread through her chest as she swallowed. Neferet sighed, her shoulders loosening, as if a knot inside her had finally begun to untangle. Hennet leaned closer, her voice lowering. "There is something you must know. The herbs, the prayers, the amulets, these are not only for your body. They are for your spirit. Childbirth opens a woman's gates not only to life, but also to the realm of death. It is the crossing point. And sometimes part of a woman lingers on that threshold even after she survives. The work of healing is to call her fully back." Neferet's hand tightened around the cup. The words struck her, for they were true. She had felt part of herself hovering in the shadows, uncertain whether to return. "How do I come back fully?" she whispered. Hennet touched the ivory torrid hanging by the baby's basket. "By remembering you are not alone. Each time you feed him, each time you laugh, each time you share bread with others, you step further from that threshold. Life pulls you forward." Neferet swallowed hard, tears rising. She looked at Ankhu, sleeping peacefully, and felt the faintest smile break across her lips. "Then I will keep stepping," she said. Hennet nodded with satisfaction, her lined face softening. "Good. Then both of you will live long, as the river flows." She rewrapped the jar and placed it firmly in Neferet's hands, as though passing down a secret inheritance from one generation of women to the next. Whispers of the gods. That night, after Hennet's visit, Neferet dreamed. She stood in a wide hall lit by flickering oil lamps, their smoke curling into the high shadows of the ceiling. Before her towered figures with animal heads, some fierce, some gentle, all watching. She recognized them as gods from the stories told since childhood, Isis with her throne-shaped crown, Tauret with her swollen belly and crocodile tail, Bes with his squat, protective stance. They did not speak with words, yet their presence pressed against her, heavy but not frightening. Isis raised a hand, and Neferet felt warmth rush through her chest. Tauret's eyes gleamed, and Neferet saw Ankhu cradled safely in her arms, his breath steady. Bes grinned, ugly and comforting all at once, stamping his feet as though to chase away invisible dangers. When Neferet awoke, the room was quiet, the reed mats cool beneath her. Ankhu stirred at her side, and she touched his cheek, whispering, "The gods see us." Her mother, awake and weaving by the door, glanced over. "What did you say?" Neferet hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Nothing. Only that we are safe." Her mother gave a knowing look, as if she had heard such words before, from women who had come close to death and returned with strange clarity. Later that morning, as Neferet fed Ankhu, she told her sister of the dream. The girl listened wide-eyed. "Does it mean you are chosen?" she asked. Neferet laughed softly, shaking her head. "No. It means I am watched over, as we all are. The gods do not choose only kings and queens. They watch mothers too. They guard every breath of the small ones." Her sister leaned close to Ankhu, whispering, "Then may they never leave you, little one." The thought lingered in Neferet's mind. For so long, childbirth had seemed like a private struggle between her body and death itself. But now, she saw it differently, as part of a greater web, held up by hands both human and divine. As the sun climbed, spilling gold across the mud-brick walls, Neferet felt a quiet strength settle inside her. Survival had not been a solitary act, it had been a chorus, of women's hands, of herbs and amulets, of whispered prayers, and perhaps of the gods themselves. The naming day. The village stirred with anticipation, for it was the 7th day since Ankhu's birth, the day when his name would be spoken before the gods, binding him to life. The courtyard was swept clean, and fresh rushes were laid on the floor. A low table was decorated with lotus blossoms and bowls of milk, symbols of purity and nourishment. Neferet, dressed in a freshly washed linen gown, sat with Ankhu cradled against her chest. Her body was still tender, but the ritual filled her with both pride and trembling awe. She knew how many children never reached this day, and the weight of it pressed upon her like the desert heat. Hennet arrived early, carrying incense that she lit in a clay censer. Smoke spiraled upward, curling like the Nile's eternal flow. Neferet's mother placed a small loaf of bread and a clay figure of Tauret on the shrine, whispering prayers under her breath. Neighbors gathered, each bringing tokens, dates, garlic cloves for protection, and even a small amulet of Bes carved from faience. Children tugged at their mother's skirts, craning to see the baby who had survived the dangerous passage. At last, Hennet raised her hands, her voice carrying over the hush. "This child has walked the threshold of shadow and light. Now he will be bound to the world of the living. Speak his name, mother, that it may be known." Neferet's heart pounded. She looked down at the baby in her arms, his lips parting as though he already knew. She lifted her chin and said clearly, "His name is Ankhu." The word carried through the courtyard. "Ankhu," the people echoed, nodding with approval. The name meant he lives, a declaration, a prayer, and a defiance against death all at once. Hennet took a bowl of Nile water, sprinkling droplets onto the child's forehead, while murmuring blessings. "May he grow as the papyrus grows. May his limbs be strong as sycamore roots. May his breath be long as the river's flow." A cheer rose, modest but heartfelt. Neferet clutched Ankhu close, her tears falling onto his linen wrappings. For the first time, she felt as though the cords tying him to life had been knotted firmly, not just by her arms but by the hands of the entire community. The feast that followed was small but joyful. Bread was broken, beer was shared, and songs were sung. And as Ankhu slept through it all, his name carried on the lips of those who loved him, binding him more deeply to the world than any thread or charm ever could. You said? Stories by Firelight. That evening, after the naming feast had ended and the village quieted again, Neferet sat by the hearth with her mother and sister. A small fire flickered in the clay brazier, casting shadows that leapt across the mud-brick walls. The air smelled of smoke, barley, and the faint sweetness of figs left from the day's offerings. Ankhu lay in his basket beside her, swaddled and breathing softly, his tiny chest rising and falling with a rhythm that steadied Neferet's heart. Every so often, his mouth twitched, as though he were tasting dreams. Her sister leaned close, eyes bright. "Tell us a story," she begged. "Tell us how the gods saved him." Neferet smiled faintly, stroking Ankhu's cheek. "It wasn't only the gods. It was Henet's hands, your songs, and mother's strength. But if you want the story, I will tell it." She began slowly, her voice low and measured, weaving the tale as though it were already legend. She told of the night when the shadow came close, when Tarit stood guard at the door, when Bes stamped his feet to chase away death. She spoke of Isis who lifted her hand, filling the room with light, and of the Nile that carried whispers of protection through the reeds. Her sister listened wide-eyed, clutching her knees, while their mother smiled with quiet pride. "Every woman's birth is a story," the older woman said softly. "And every story binds the family closer. One day, he will hear it too, and he will know how dearly he was fought for." Neferet nodded, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Yes. I want him to grow up knowing that life is not something given easily. It is something carried, protected, and cherished." Outside, the night deepened. Frogs croaked by the river, and a soft breeze stirred the reeds. Within the house, the fire glowed steady, as though it, too, were listening to the story. And for the first time since her labor, Neferet felt not just relief, but pride. Pride in surviving, pride in carrying her son through the threshold, and pride in knowing that her story, like so many women before her, would live on in whispers, songs, and firelight. The threads of life. Days turned into weeks, and Neferet's strength returned more fully with each passing dawn. Ankhu grew as well, his dark eyes bright and curious, reaching for the light that fell across the mud-brick walls. Each cry, each flutter of movement, reminded Neferet of the delicate thread that tied them both to life. The house was alive with routine. Women visited daily, checking on Neferet's recovery, sharing meals, and offering advice on care, herbs, and prayers. Henet came often, sometimes with a new charm, sometimes to hum a song of protection. Each gesture, each word, was a reinforcement of the bond that had carried Neferet and Ankhu through the perilous threshold of birth. Neferet herself began to notice changes in her perception. She felt more attuned to the rhythms of her body, the subtleties of her son's needs, the silent messages in a midwife's touch. Even small acts, feeding Ankhu, washing his tiny hands, wrapping him in fresh linen, took on a profound significance. They were threads, she realized, weaving a tapestry of survival, love, and guidance. One afternoon, as the sun poured gold across the river bank, she sat with Ankhu on her lap while her mother wove a mat from reeds. "You see," her mother said, "life is not only given. It is carried in layers by the earth, the gods, and the hands of those who love you. Each breath, each step, is a thread in that weave." Neferet pressed her cheek to her son's, inhaling his scent, warm and earthy, and whispered, "Then I will weave carefully. And I will teach him to weave too." Henet's words returned to her mind. Survival was never solitary. It was a chorus of voices, a community of hands, and an unbroken line of women reaching back through time. Neferet understood now that every cry of a newborn, every whispered prayer, every trembling mother carried weight far beyond the moment. It was the story of life itself, carried forward, thread by thread. As the river flowed past their village, steady and eternal, Neferet felt herself anchored, tethered firmly to life and to the generations of women who had come before. And in that quiet certainty, she knew she could meet whatever lay ahead, for she had seen the shadow and returned. And Ankhu stirred in her arms, small fingers curling, his eyes wide open to the world she had fought so fiercely to join. Legacy of the mothers. Months passed, and the seasons shifted. The sun grew hotter, the Nile swelled with summer floods, and the village carried on with the quiet persistence of life. Neferet walked among her neighbors with Ankhu in her arms, his tiny feet now kicking lightly against her chest. Her body had healed, but the memory of the night he was born lingered, a quiet reverence woven into every movement. Hennet visited less often now, but each time she came, she brought gifts of knowledge, how to balance herbs for strength, how to read signs in the river reeds, how to interpret the whispers of wind and bird. Neferet learned, absorbed, and began to teach others, passing forward the wisdom that had saved her son and herself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant palms, Neferet sat by the river bank, Ankhu perched on her hip. She told him stories of courage, of women who had faced death and returned, of gods and spirits who watched and protected. His eyes, wide and shining, followed her every gesture, absorbing the words as if they were the river's own water. Her mother joined her, placing a hand on Neferet's shoulder. "You see, little Lotus," she said softly, "we are all part of the same thread. Every mother who survives leaves a legacy, not just in her children, but in the wisdom she passes on." Neferet smiled, her gaze on Ankhu, who reached for a floating reed, his fingers grasping instinctively. "Then I will teach him," she said, "so he knows the strength and courage of those who came before him. So he remembers the hands that carried him here." The evening air shimmered with the song of cicadas and the soft rush of the river. Life pulsed steadily around them, ordinary yet miraculous. Neferet pressed Ankhu's cheek to hers and whispered a prayer of thanks to Isis, Tauret, and Bes, and to all the mothers whose hands had guided her. She knew the shadow would always linger somewhere nearby, but she also knew that the chorus of women, the prayers, the rituals, and the bonds of love were stronger. And in that strength, she found not only survival, but the quiet triumph of life, carried forward in every heartbeat, every breath, and every story passed from mother to child. Neferet held Ankhu close as the first stars appeared, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the deep peace of a life truly reclaimed.